attack came without warning, silent, swift, and brutal. The Krixal Collective, a race known for their uncompromising militaristic culture, unleashed their fury on humanity's frontier colonies. Their Harbinger-class warships, massive vessels of destruction, hovered above the planets, casting long, menacing shadows. On the ground, cyber-augmented shock troops, enhanced by the latest Krixal bioengineering, tore through the human defenses. There was no warning, no time to call for reinforcements. Within hours, entire colonies were wiped off the map. The first target was Fort Dagger, a forward military outpost on a desolate moon in the Alpha Centauri system. It was meant to be an unassuming defensive post, a place where humanity's forces could monitor the border of Krixal space. Instead, it became the site of a massacre. The Krixal warship's first salvo obliterated the fort's outer defenses, tearing apart the communication arrays and dropping entire sections of the base into the icy ground. When the defenders scrambled to their posts, they found their weapons useless against the Krixal's advanced shields. Within moments, the cyber-enhanced shock troops were storming the base. Inside Fort Dagger, Major Dravik Holt, a former fleet officer turned combat engineer, found himself in the heart of the chaos. He had been demoted from his former command post after questioning the tactical decisions made by his superiors, who insisted on traditional frontal assaults. Holt had always believed in outsmarting the enemy, understanding that victory wasn't always won through sheer numbers or firepower, but through strategy. He had been reassigned to the engineers, tasked with supporting the base's infrastructure, but now he found himself thrust into a real battle, a battle for survival. The Krixal didn't give humanity the chance to surrender. As Holt fought his way through the corridors of the base, he saw firsthand the brutality of their tactics. Even as the human soldiers dropped their weapons, begging for mercy, the Krixal showed none. Their shock troops, with their glowing cybernetic eyes and enhanced limbs, hunted down every last defender, tearing through their ranks with horrifying precision. Holt had seen combat before, but nothing like this. The human forces at Fort Dagger were massacred, their bodies scattered in the ruins of the base like broken dolls. Holt, along with a small group of engineers, managed to survive in the wreckage for 72 hours. They were trapped in the deep caverns beneath the fort, hiding from the Krixal forces that continued their rampage above. For 3 days they scavenged for supplies, used their engineering skills to fortify their position, and patched up the wounded. It was during this time that Holt made a discovery, something that would change the tide of the war. While repairing a damaged communications relay, Holt stumbled upon something unusual in the Krixal tech. Their neural link systems, the very thing that made their troops so deadly, had a vulnerability. The shock troops' cybernetic implants, which connected them to their war machines and allowed for near-instantaneous communication and coordination, relied heavily on a form of quantum entanglement. Holt wasn't a cybernetics expert, but he had enough knowledge of advanced systems to understand that this entanglement was prone to interference. The problem? The Krixal had no idea that their systems could be compromised by electromagnetic frequencies at a specific frequency range. The realization was monumental. Holt's mind raced as he connected the dots. This weakness could be exploited. The Krixal had engineered their technology to be virtually unbreakable, but this flaw, buried deep within the systems, was their Achilles heel. He made a mental note to bring it to the higher command. If humanity could exploit this vulnerability, they might stand a chance. As the battle raged on above, Holt and his team continued to make their way through the wreckage, scavenging what they could and avoiding detection by the Krixal forces. Eventually, after days of evading capture, they stumbled upon something that could change the course of the war. A lower-caste Krixal technician who had fled the massacre. The technician, a young Krixal male named Thrix, had witnessed the slaughter and, unlike his superiors, was horrified by the brutality. With his mind overwhelmed by guilt, Thrix had defected, deciding to expose the truth of the massacre to the galaxy. Thrix gave Holt a data drive containing footage of the massacre at Fort Dagger. Footage of human soldiers begging for their lives, only to be slaughtered by the Crixel shock troops. The technician had risked everything to get the footage out, knowing that if he was caught, he would face the wrath of the Crixel leadership. Holt promised to get the footage to the right people to ensure the galaxy knew the truth. But even as he made that promise, he knew that the Crixel High Command would do everything in their power to cover up the massacre. Holt and his team managed to escape the ruins of Fort Dagger and make their way to a nearby transport, carrying the precious data with them. But the damage had already been done. The Crixel High Command, fearing the consequences of the leaked footage, covered up the execution of the human forces, spreading lies to cover their tracks. Meanwhile, Holt made his way back to Earth, determined to share what he had learned. The footage of the massacre was broadcasted across the galaxy, shocking humanity and its allies. While the Crixel attempted to suppress the truth, the damage was already done. The Dominion's actions had been exposed for the galaxy to see. Holt's discovery of the Crixel's weakness, combined with the evidence of their atrocities, set the stage for humanity's resistance to their invasion. The war was far from over, but Holt knew that humanity had a chance to fight back. The Crixel Collective had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity, thinking they could wipe out the human colonies and face no consequences. They had underestimated the will of a species that would not be broken, no matter the odds. Holt's discovery of the Crixel's weakness was humanity's first step toward reclaiming their future. Admiral Corlin Vask's anger simmered as the images of the massacre at Fort Dagger played out across the galaxy. His initial response was one of disbelief, his mind reeling at the scale of the brutality. But as the galaxy's political machinery churned, the Crixel Collective's propaganda machine went into overdrive, attempting to bury the truth. Still, the footage leaked by the lower caste Crixel technician was out there now, too damning to hide. Vask understood one thing. This was just the beginning of humanity's fight for survival. On Earth, Major Dravik Holt, recently thrust into a leadership position, knew they had to act quickly, or humanity would face an annihilation they could never recover from. His team's discovery of a flaw in the Crixel's cybernetic systems, an electromagnetic vulnerability, had opened a window of opportunity. The Crixel were not invulnerable, and Holt was determined to exploit that weakness, but they would need a plan. They would need a weapon. The Crixel's boarding pods, vital for the transport of troops and equipment, had been fitted with EM shield generators to protect them from outside interference. Holt and his engineers quickly realized that if they could bypass these shields, they could disable the Crixel's cybernetic-controlled forces, preventing them from fully mobilizing. The solution was simple: EMP bombs, powerful enough to disable the shields and cripple the Crixel's ability to board and fight effectively. The problem? The only EMP technology available to humanity was archaic at best, outdated in comparison to the Crixel's advanced systems, but Holt wasn't deterred. His mind, constantly searching for unconventional solutions, quickly connected the dots. They had Crixel technology at their disposal. Earth Command had been able to secure several pieces of Crixel tech from the wreckage of the initial attacks, including parts from downed Harbinger-class ships and boarding pods. The stolen technology held the key to turning the tide of the war. With the green light from Earth Command, Holt set to work. It was a race against time, and Holt knew they couldn't afford to make mistakes. They commandeered abandoned asteroid miners, once used for deep space excavation, and retrofitted them into mobile weapons platforms. Using black market railguns, salvaged Crixel tech, and makeshift EMP bombs, Holt and his team of engineers worked day and night to transform the unassuming mining vessels into viable combat ships. The EMPs, while untested, were the only option to counter the Crixel's near-invincible advantage in space. Meanwhile, the Crixel weren't standing still. Their warships, the Harbinger class, had proven devastating in their initial assault. These colossal vessels, bristling with energy weapons, orbital lances and cybernetic shock troops, had already torn through humanity's outposts with ruthless efficiency. But despite their overwhelming firepower, The Crixel were still vulnerable. Their dependence on their advanced quantum entangled targeting systems and the need for precise coordination left them exposed in certain areas. This was the flaw Holt had discovered, and now Earth's countermeasures were ready to be deployed. The first real test came when the Crixel launched their next assault, this time targeting Hephaestus Station, a vital mining hub that humanity could not afford to lose. The station was situated on the outer rim of the solar system, a strategic point in humanity's efforts to secure resources for their fleets. The Crixel were aware of its importance, and they attacked with full force, sending a fleet of Harbinger-class ships to obliterate the station and its surrounding defenses. As the Crixel ships approached, Holt gave the order. Operation Blindside was a go. The makeshift fleet of asteroid miners, now retrofitted with EMP bombs, positioned themselves in the shadow of nearby debris fields, waiting for the right moment to strike. Holt had planned for this day, and everything hinged on whether the EMP bombs would work. The first strike came when the Crixel began deploying their boarding pods to take control of Hephaestus Station. The silent, deadly ships launched their pods into the station's orbit, only to find that humanity was waiting for them. Holt's team had triangulated the Crixel's quantum echoes, using the same frequencies they had exploited before to track the incoming pods. As they entered the kill zone, the EMP bombs detonated. 7 ships, each carrying a Crixel boarding pod, were struck by the blasts, but of the 7, only 3 EMP bombs detonated successfully. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The shock wave from the detonations disabled one of the Harbinger-class ships, its targeting systems malfunctioning and its shields crumbling in the wake of the EMP burst. For the first time, humanity had struck back, and the Crixel were forced to retreat. But the Dominion wasn't done yet. The retaliation came swiftly. Within hours, the Crixel deployed mobile EM scramblers, hoping to neutralize humanity's advantage. These mobile units, designed to jam electromagnetic pulses, were equipped with a level of sophistication that put human efforts to the test. They were designed to prevent the Crixel from being caught off guard again. But Holt had anticipated this. He knew the Crixel would adapt, just as humanity had. The war was far from over, but the first victory was a sign of things to come. Holt's team had gained valuable ground, but it was clear that the Crixel would stop at nothing to crush humanity once and for all. Now, the real battle would begin. Humanity had made its move, and the Crixel had no choice but to respond. The fight was on, and Earth had just begun to show the galaxy what it was capable of. Holt's eyes never wavered from the screen as the Crixel fleet retreated, temporarily thwarted but not defeated. He knew that they would be back, but humanity had proven one thing today. They were no longer just survivors. They were players on the galactic stage, and the Crixel would soon learn that it was a mistake to underestimate Earth. The brief victory over the Crixel had given humanity a glimpse of hope, but Holt knew it was far from over. As the Dominion quickly adapted, humanity's tactical advantage from their EMP bombs began to fade. The Crixel's response was swift and relentless. Their first move was to deploy mobile EM scramblers, specially designed units meant to neutralize the very EMP attacks humanity had used to strike the Harbingers. The Dominion wasn't content with mere retaliation. It was obvious now that humanity's tactics had disrupted their carefully orchestrated plans. This, in Holt's mind, was the true breakthrough. The Crixel had been shaken, their overwhelming superiority shaken. If humanity could push forward with the same ingenuity, they could shift the tide of this war. But Holt wasn't naive. The Crixel were ruthless, and now that their fleet was aware of the threat, they'd moved to counter it. Holt knew that the mobile EM scramblers would make the EMPs less effective, and his next step would need to be far more sophisticated. The Crixel were going to be looking for vulnerabilities, so Holt would have to make the first move count. As he sat in the command center aboard the Wisp, Holt turned to his team, his mind already racing with possibilities. He had been thinking about the Crixel's next move. What would they do when they figured out humanity's EMP weapon? Holt's eyes flicked across the glowing tactical display, where the Crixel fleet's movements were mapped in real time. They were moving methodically, keeping a distance from Earth's remaining colonies, but always positioning themselves in ways that would make it difficult for Earth's scattered defenses to retaliate. "I think we've been going about this all wrong," Holt muttered, more to himself than to the room. "We've been reacting to their moves. What if we bait them into making the first mistake?" His team looked at him expectantly, waiting for him to elaborate. "We have to make the Crixel think they've won. Lure them into a trap," Holt continued. "If we can get them into the ruins of Hephaestus Beta, they'll walk right into it." He could see the skepticism in their eyes. Hephaestus Beta had once been a thriving station before the Crixel attack. Now it was a graveyard, its infrastructure shattered and rendered useless. But Holt wasn't looking for strategic value in the station itself. He was after something far more important: deception. The plan was simple in theory but complex in execution. Holt and his team would pack the ruins of Hephaestus Beta with scattering materials, enough to mask the Crixel's scans, and make it appear as if there was nothing left of value. They'd build a false sense of security, making the Crixel believe they were facing only scraps of the station's former resources. Then, once they had the Crixel's attention, Holt would strike. "Set up pre-planted EMP mines throughout the debris field," Holt ordered, his voice steady. "They'll be forced to navigate through the ruins, giving us the perfect chance to hit them where it hurts." The team worked tirelessly to prepare the trap. Holt's plan hinged on timing. He needed the Crixel fleet to move into position before they realized the threat, and, as always, it was a race against time. Meanwhile, the Crixel fleet, led by Admiral Vorsk aboard the Dreadspire, continued their pursuit of humanity. Vorsk, a veteran of countless campaigns, had no interest in failure. The loss of several Harbinger-class ships had been an unexpected blow, but the Dominion's war machine was relentless. Vorsk was determined to finish what his predecessor had started: humanity's complete annihilation. As the fleet approached Hephaestus Beta, Holt's team held their breath. The debris field surrounding the station shimmered with the faint glow of radiation, the remnants of a once thriving industrial hub now reduced to a labyrinth of twisted metal and forgotten machinery. They had set the trap. Now they had to wait. Vorsk's fleet entered the area, unaware of the carefully laid mines hidden within the wreckage. Holt's heart raced as he monitored the Crixel fleet's movements. They were taking the bait. The Crixel began moving cautiously, probing the area with their sensors, but the scattering materials interfered with their scans, blinding them to the danger that lay ahead. The first explosion shattered the silence. A massive EMP mine detonated, sending a shockwave through the Crixel formation. The first Harbinger-class ship was crippled, its systems shut down in an instant. Holt felt a surge of victory, but there was no time to savor it. The Crixel were quick to react, sending out more ships and drones to investigate. They knew something was wrong. Vorsk was no fool. He had realized by now that Earth's resistance wasn't just a fluke. Holt could see the flagship, the Dreadspire, drawing closer, its massive size looming like a shadow over the debris field. Holt knew that the next move had to be perfect. If they allowed the Crixel to regroup, the entire plan would fall apart. As the Crixel flagship entered the kill zone, Holt activated the second phase of the plan, the EMP traps hidden within the wreckage. The final detonations were timed to perfection, sending out a series of pulses that disabled 2 more ships. Holt watched as the Crixel fleet struggled to regain control, the once formidable war machines now lurching and grinding to a halt. But the victory was short-lived. Vorsk, unwilling to let his fleet be destroyed, initiated a manual override of the Dreadspire's systems. He wasn't going to let a few EMP mines ruin the entire operation. His crew scrambled to bring the flagship back under control, but the damage had already been done. The override triggered a catastrophic failure in the Dreadspire's systems, causing the ship to spiral out of control. Holt's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the Dreadspire careen toward him. It was only a matter of seconds before the ship crashed, and Holt realized with sudden clarity that the Crixel fleet's downfall had already begun. The Dreadspire was headed for the final kill zone. A sudden explosion from the ship rocked the battlefield, but not enough to destroy it. Instead, the Dreadspire's catastrophic failure made it a blind, uncontrollable projectile. Holt quickly ordered his team to pull back, but the ship's trajectory shifted, barely missing their position. Vorsk's ship was gone, the flagship reduced to nothing more than a hunk of twisted metal, and the Crixel's seemingly unbreakable resolve shattered. Holt stood still, watching the wreckage of the Dreadspire tumble through space. His plan had worked. For the first time, humanity had struck a devastating blow to a species that had once thought of them as nothing more than prey. But Holt knew this wasn't the end. The Crixel would come again, and they would bring their full fury. Humanity had taken its first steps toward victory, but the war was far from over. And Holt, for one, was ready to meet whatever came next. The Crixel homeworld loomed in the distance, a distant beacon of destruction and alien power. Holt stood before the planning table in the darkened command room of the Wisp, his mind racing. The silence was deafening as the plan that had been in motion for weeks was about to come to fruition. They were moments away from boarding the Crixel flagship, the Dreadspire, and from there to strike directly at the heart of the Crixel Dominion. Holt could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. Failure wasn't an option. It wasn't just the stakes of the mission that worried him. He was well aware that this would likely be a one-way trip. Infiltrating the Crixel homeworld was no small feat. They had to breach the heart of the Dominion and in doing so face the full might of their forces. But Holt wasn't the type of man to shy away from impossible odds. His team, what remained of it, was ready, and they would strike hard. "We can't waste time," Holt said, his voice grim. "Once we board, we move fast. Get to their central command, hit the frequency pulse and get out. No room for mistakes." The team, now down to a handful of men and women who had survived the previous operations, nodded solemnly. Every face in the room wore the same expression: resignation, determination, and the understanding that this mission could be the last. Draven Kell, the former colony ship mechanic who had been Holt's right hand throughout the conflict, stepped forward. His eyes, though tired from months of relentless fighting, were sharp. "We've tested the frequency pulse multiple times. It will work, Holt. It'll fry their systems. But we need to make sure the Dreadspire doesn't have a chance to retaliate once we hit them." Holt nodded. "We know the risks. Let's make sure we don't give them one." With the plan set, they made their final preparations. Holt's heart pounded as he reviewed the schematics of the Crixel flagship, memorizing every detail of its structure. They had spent weeks infiltrating Crixel intelligence, studying their weaknesses, and now they had the perfect opportunity to strike. The Wisp moved silently through the darkness, undetected by Crixel patrols. Its stealth systems, a mixture of human ingenuity and stolen Crixel tech, allowed them to approach the homeworld unnoticed. The sleek ship shuddered as they neared the edge of the Crixel atmosphere. This was it. Time was running out. As Holt and his team boarded the Crixel flagship under the cover of darkness, they could feel the weight of their mission pressing on them. The air was thick with tension as they silently infiltrated the Dreadspire, their footsteps muffled by the advanced suits they wore, designed to reduce their presence to almost nothing. But despite their precautions, the Crixel were not naive. As they entered the bowels of the Dreadspire, they quickly realized they had underestimated the enemy's preparedness. They were met with automated defenses, drones, automated turrets, and pressure-sensitive security systems. The Crixel knew their enemies were coming, and they had prepared for it. Vask's team split into two groups, with the goal of reaching the heart of the ship and uploading the frequency-locked EMP pulse directly into the ship's comm array. It was a task that required precision and speed. Any mistake could lead to immediate detection or, worse, a deadly trap. Holt's team moved methodically, taking down the drones as quietly as possible, using only the most efficient weapons and tools. At one point, Holt found himself face to face with a Crixel drone, its glowing eyes scanning the darkness. His hand tightened around his pulse rifle, ready to fire, but Kell, his trusted ally, intervened, silently disabling the drone with a quick, well-placed shot. There was no room for hesitation. They moved on. The deeper they went, the more the tension mounted. Each turn could be the last. The Crixel flagship was a maze of corridors, each corner hiding potential death, every system a possible trap. Holt's breath quickened, his mind racing with strategies and contingency plans. The stakes had never been higher. They reached the central core of the Dreadspire, where the main communication array and the quantum processor that governed the ship's systems were located. It was there that they would initiate the frequency pulse, a move that would send the Crixel fleet into disarray. Holt and his team worked quickly, setting up the EMP device with practiced precision, but as they finished, a warning light flashed on the console. The Crixel had detected the breach. Within seconds, automated security measures engaged. The ship's AI had been alerted, and the countdown to full-scale defense was already ticking. Holt's pulse quickened. There was no time left. "We need to move now," Holt said, his voice tight with urgency. "Get to the pulse, now!" The team made their move, rushing through the corridors, but as they turned a corner, a Crixel drone appeared in front of them. Without hesitation, they opened fire, the rapid burst of energy shredding the drone. But it wasn't enough. The noise had alerted other drones. Holt's heart raced as they continued their mad dash through the ship. The ship's AI, now fully aware of their presence, triggered additional defensive measures, sealing the doors behind them, trapping them in a corridor with no exit. Just as they thought they were done for, Kell made a quick calculation. "We're not done yet. I can reroute the power from the secondary engines into the pulse generator." Holt nodded grimly. "Do it." Kell's fingers flew over the console, rerouting power, and then, with a click, the frequency pulse was ready. Holt pressed the button. The ship shook violently as the pulse shot through the air, a massive surge of electromagnetic energy that fried every electronic system it came in contact with. The ship's comms, shields, and navigation systems flickered, sparking and shutting down. The EMP pulse had worked. The Crixel fleet was now crippled. But the damage wasn't done yet. The ripple effect continued. As the pulse spread through the flagship systems, the damage was too great for the Crixel to repair. Holt watched in disbelief as the once mighty Dreadspire began to fall apart, its systems unraveling, as their ships around the galaxy followed suit. As the chaos spread throughout the Dominion's fleet, Holt could see it all on the live feeds. Ships spun out of control, their once impenetrable shields flickering and collapsing. The Crixel were in disarray, and the tide had turned in humanity's favor. The victory came at a cost. Holt's team had made it out, but their bodies were battered and burned. The Crixel flagship had been reduced to nothing more than a hulk, drifting in the void. And yet, the damage had been done. The Crixel were no longer an unstoppable force. The war had been won, and humanity had made its mark on the galaxy. The Crixel fleet was in disarray. The EMP pulse had done its job. Ships that once sailed through space like a tide of terror were now crippled, their systems malfunctioning, their once pristine hulls punctuated by the chaos that had erupted. The Crixel's advanced technology, their pride and strength, lay shattered, unable to respond to the sudden disruption caused by Holt's daring plan. What had been an unstoppable force just days ago now drifted helplessly through space like a wounded animal, disoriented and scrambling to survive. From the control room of the Wisp, Holt watched in grim satisfaction as the live feed showed Crixel warships spiraling out of control. The sound of blaring alarms, flashing red lights, and the frantic commands from Crixel commanders were music to his ears. The warlords, who had believed their empire invincible, were now fleeing in panic. They had lost their grip on the galaxy, and their fleet was nothing more than a broken shadow of its former might. Holt's fingers brushed against the console in front of him, feeling the hum of the ship as it continued its silent journey through the void. The tension, the hours of anticipation, had culminated in this moment, a moment where they had taken the Crixel's greatest strength and turned it into their greatest weakness. But even as Holt allowed himself a rare moment of relief, he knew this wasn't over. The Krixal were not the only ones watching. Across the Dominion, rebellion was brewing. Holt's actions, broadcast across the galaxy, had done more than cripple the Krixal fleet. They had shattered the illusion of invulnerability that had held the Dominion together for centuries. The footage of the warlords fleeing from their own forces sparked something in the lower caste districts of the Krixal Empire: fear. The lower classes, long subjugated and oppressed, had watched their leaders panic with disgust. They had seen their rulers run, abandoning them to their fate. It wasn't just the Krixal fleet that was breaking apart. The very foundation of the Dominion was crumbling. Holt could feel the shift in the galaxy as the first signs of rebellion began to ripple through the lower caste. What had once been a tightly controlled empire was now facing the very thing it had long feared: insurrection. "Time to make sure we capitalize on this," Holt muttered to himself as he adjusted the comms to transmit to his team. But even as the galaxy shifted, Holt knew that the real work had just begun. The victory against the Krixal fleet had weakened them, yes, but the war was far from over. The Krixal were retreating, regrouping, but their warlords were not giving up without a fight. Holt's gaze darkened as he thought of the tens of thousands of human lives lost in this war. And though the fleet had been crippled, the Krixal were not a species that would simply roll over. "Vex," Holt said, his voice carrying the weight of their next move. "We need to secure the colonies. We can't let the Krixal regroup and recover." Vex, who had become a reluctant figurehead of the resistance, stood nearby, his brow furrowed in thought. The footage of the Krixal leaders' retreat had galvanized the lower caste revolts, but Vex knew that such rebellions were unpredictable. The lower districts of the Dominion were in turmoil, and while that chaos worked to humanity's advantage, it also meant more instability. Earth had already seen the destructive consequences of unchecked chaos. The last thing they needed was a war breaking out on multiple fronts. "We need to ensure their technology doesn't fall into their hands again," Vex replied, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "The Krixal will never truly defeated. They're just fractured. We need to keep the pressure on." Holt's attention shifted back to the monitor as the image of a Krixal warlord appeared. This one, battered but defiant, speaking from a secret command ship. The warlord was trying to rally the remaining loyalists, calling for a quick regroup, but Holt knew that their fleet was done. The Krixal were no longer a unified force. It was only a matter of time before the Empire fell apart completely. "We'll need nanite pneumatizing shields to protect the surviving colonies," Vex continued, his eyes scanning the damage reports. "We can't risk the Krixal pulling any more surprises on us." Holt nodded, making a mental note to coordinate with Dravin Kell and the engineering team. The nanite pneumatizing shields had been a priority ever since the initial battles with the Krixal. Now, the need for them was even more pressing. As Vex's words sank in, Holt felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. His body ached from the battles, his mind from the constant calculations and strategies. He'd seen too much destruction, too many bodies, and yet the war wasn't over. He knew that, but the weight of his decisions, of the lives lost, the cost of the victory, began to settle heavily on him. The victories felt hollow when the galaxy's political system had allowed the Krixal to reach this point in the first place. "We need to hold steady," Holt said softly. "The Krixal aren't the only ones watching this. The Federation will move to peace talks soon. We can't allow them to gloss over what's happened here." Vex was silent for a moment, his gaze turned to the distant stars outside the window. "You know they'll try to sweep it under the rug," he said quietly. "The Senate won't want to admit how they failed." Holt's lips tightened. "Then it's our job to make sure they can't ignore it. We've fought this war with everything we had. Now we make sure humanity isn't overlooked again." The tension in Holt's chest only grew as he thought about the political forces at play. The Senate had never truly supported Earth's fight. They had been willing to cut Earth off, isolate them, and let them face the Krixal threat alone, and now they would be forced to acknowledge humanity's strength. But Holt knew that political maneuvering and backroom deals would follow. The real question was whether Earth's newfound power would be respected, or whether it would be dismissed as an inconvenient truth. Bex turned his eyes toward Holt, his gaze unwavering. "They'll have to accept it, Holt. The galaxy won't be able to ignore humanity anymore." Holt's face softened slightly. "It's about time." But even as they spoke, the situation was far from settled. The Crixel warlords had retreated, but their empire was not done. As humanity's role grew in the galaxy, so too did the need for vigilance. There was more to the war than just winning battles. The true test of humanity's place in the stars would be how they navigated the next steps, how they established their power without becoming the very thing they had fought against. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with, but as Holt stood at the precipice of this new era, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. The aftermath of humanity's victory over the Crixel had left Earth standing on the precipice of a new era, one marked by both opportunity and danger. The Crixel fleet was shattered, and the Dominion's political and military structures were teetering on the brink of collapse. But with that victory came the daunting task of rebuilding. It wasn't just about salvaging the physical infrastructure of Earth's colonies. It was about reconstructing humanity's place in a galaxy that had seen them as insignificant, a species on the edge of extinction. Now, Earth was poised to rise as a major power, and Commander Dravik Holt was determined that humanity's future would be shaped on their terms. The first priority was, of course, the military. Holt's tactics had been revolutionary, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, a well-placed strike and a precise plan could turn the tide of war. But as he watched the remnants of Crixel warships being dismantled and their technology analyzed, he knew that Earth's military had to be redefined for future conflicts. The Crixel's advanced systems, harnessed through sheer brutality, had been humanity's greatest challenge. But with their technology in hand, Earth had an unprecedented opportunity to leap forward in terms of capability. The key to rebuilding was not just in the raw materials. It was in the strategic use of the Crixel's own innovations. Holt watched as the engineers and scientists began reverse engineering the Crixel tech, creating hybrid systems that would enhance Earth's defenses and military capabilities. The most important breakthrough, however, was the development of the nanite pneumalizing shields that had saved countless lives during the conflict. Now, these shields were being refined and adapted for Earth's new fleet, ensuring that the threat posed by any future enemies, whether the Crixel or anyone else, would be met with the full force of humanity's newly forged power. But the rebuilding wasn't limited to military technology alone. Holt knew that humanity needed to stabilize its political standing within the galaxy. The Federation, once dismissive of Earth's capabilities, had been forced to reconsider its stance. Humanity's strength, its resilience in the face of annihilation, was no longer in question. Holt's successful strategies had garnered admiration from unlikely corners of the galaxy, and his name had become synonymous with the fight for survival. As Holt walked through the corridors of Earth's new command center, he couldn't help but reflect on the political fallout. The Federation had reluctantly acknowledged humanity's power, but Holt wasn't interested in a political role. He had never been one for office politics, and even now, as Earth's role in the galaxy grew, he maintained his focus on the military and peacekeeping. There was still so much to be done. Earth's next step was not just to defend itself, but to maintain its position as a stabilizing force in a galaxy that was fast realizing how fragile its power structures really were. Strategically, Holt had always known that Earth couldn't afford to stand alone. Humanity's newfound strength had to be consolidated through alliances, and now that the Crixel threat had been neutralized, Holt was able to turn his attention to potential partners. The former Zorathian Crixel defectors, once enemies of Earth, now looked to the human-led resistance as a beacon of hope. Many Zorathi warlords, their empire fractured by internal dissent, approached Holt with offers of alliance. The same was true of Crixel dissidents, who had long suffered under their own oppressive regime. It wasn't just about survival, it was about creating a new order, one that was more inclusive and perhaps more humane. As Holt met with former Zorathi leaders, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. These were not the conquerors who had once viewed humanity as weak and fragile. They were survivors, just as humanity had become. Slowly, negotiations began to take shape. Trade agreements were established, bringing resources and knowledge that Earth had once been denied. The Zorathi's once feared technology, once used against humanity, was now being shared as part of a mutually beneficial relationship. It was a careful balancing act, one that required patience and diplomacy. But Holt had learned the hard way that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about adaptability, about knowing when to act and when to negotiate. But not everyone in the galaxy was so eager to embrace Earth's rise. The Federation's leadership, while grudgingly recognizing Earth's new status, was still wary of the implications. Earth's influence had grown too quickly, and there were those within the Federation who feared the consequences of empowering humanity as much as they had. They knew that Earth, with its newfound alliances and military might, could no longer be ignored. But how much power should humanity wield? Despite these tensions, Holt knew that the future was in humanity's hands. His focus remained on ensuring that Earth's military didn't become a tool for conquest, but rather a force for peace. The Silent Armada, Earth's newly formed fleet, a mix of captured Crixel ships and human-designed warships, was designed not for domination, but for protection. The fleet would patrol the galaxy, ensuring that the power vacuum left by the collapse of the Crixel and Zorathi empires didn't devolve into chaos. It was an ambitious goal, and Holt was determined to see it through. His own position within the military was less defined. While his tactics had earned him the admiration of many, Holt had never sought fame or power. He had always seen himself as a soldier, not a leader. But in the face of a shifting galaxy, he understood that his leadership would be necessary not for political gain, but for the security and stability of humanity's future. Holt's name would go down in history, but he didn't seek the accolades. He was driven by something more personal, the desire to make sure that humanity would never be left for dead again. As Holt stood at the front of the command center, looking out over the bustling activity of Earth's forces, he felt a deep sense of purpose. Humanity had come a long way since the dark days of the Crixal invasion, and though the galaxy had changed forever, Holt knew that the work was just beginning. Earth was no longer a fringe player in galactic politics, it was a rising power, and its influence would continue to grow. The alliances forged with former enemies, the technologies shared, and the military capabilities now in place ensured that Earth's future was secure, at least for now. But Holt also knew that the peace would not last forever. There were always new threats on the horizon, always new dangers lurking in the depths of space. Humanity had learned that lesson the hard way, but Holt was confident in one thing: whatever came next, Earth would face it not as an underdog, but as a force to be reckoned with. Earth's newfound power rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave, shifting the balance of forces in ways that many had never anticipated. The collapse of the Crixel and Zorathi dominions left a vast power vacuum, and humanity, once dismissed as insignificant and fragile, now stood at the center of this new galactic order. The Silent Armada, a fleet born out of Earth's struggle for survival, had become an undeniable symbol of strength. No longer just a collection of disparate colonies, Earth now commanded attention, respect, and fear. However, with power came responsibility, and with responsibility came opposition. Humanity's rise wasn't without its complications. As Earth solidified its influence, former Zorathi allies, disillusioned with the collapse of their own empire, began to seek refuge with humanity. These former adversaries, once the architects of many of Earth's darkest moments, now sought protection under the banner of the Silent Armada. In exchange for sanctuary, they offered not just their military expertise, but their knowledge of galactic politics and trade. The defectors were a mixed group. Some were warlords who had lost everything in the fall of the Zorathi, while others were simple soldiers seeking a new path. But they all had one thing in common. They recognized the emerging power of Earth, and they wanted to be part of it. Commander Dravik Holt, though a reluctant figurehead of humanity's resurgence, found himself at the center of these developments. While he had always been a soldier first, he was now viewed as a leader, albeit one with no ambition for political power. The Silent Armada's success was due in large part to his tactics, but as Earth's influence spread, Holt found himself pulled into diplomatic discussions that made him uncomfortable. He had spent his life fighting battles on the front lines, not negotiating in the back rooms of galactic politics. But as more and more factions sought to align with Earth, Holt realized that he could no longer remain on the sidelines. With the influx of former Zorathi allies came a surge of diplomatic opportunities. Holt and his advisors brokered trade deals and political pacts with these new allies, forging ties that allowed Earth to expand its influence in ways that would have been unimaginable a few short years ago. The former Zorathi warlords provided valuable military technology and resources, things that Earth had long coveted but had never been able to secure due to its lack of power. The result was a thriving network of trade routes, providing Earth with access to advanced materials, new technologies, and vital resources. This, in turn, bolstered the Silent Armada's strength, ensuring that Earth would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Yet, despite the success of these diplomatic efforts, the political landscape remained volatile. Not everyone in the galaxy was eager to see Earth rise to prominence. Some factions, particularly those that had previously been aligned with the now collapsed Dominion, viewed Earth's ascension with suspicion and fear. Earth had always been seen as a small player in galactic politics, and many species resented the idea of a formerly weak and isolated humanity taking the lead. Some questioned whether the Silent Armada's strength was a threat or a necessary tool for maintaining peace. Others feared the influence Earth would gain through its new alliances, fearing that humanity's rise would come at their expense. Despite these tensions, Holt and his team worked tirelessly to ensure that the Silent Armada was not only a symbol of power, but a force for stability. The fleet was carefully deployed, not to conquer or dominate, but to maintain order in the wake of the Crixel and Zorathi collapses. Holt understood the delicate balance that had to be struck. He had seen firsthand the dangers of unchecked power. The Silent Armada's presence in key systems served as both a deterrent and a guarantee of peace, offering protection to those who sought it and ensuring that no one power could dominate the galaxy again. Holt's leadership was crucial in navigating these complex dynamics. Though he had never sought the mantle of leadership, he had become a central figure in Earth's diplomatic efforts. His tactical genius on the battlefield had earned him the respect of those who fought alongside him, and his calm, unwavering demeanor made him the ideal leader in the face of the galaxy's shifting power structures. Still, Holt remained focused on the larger mission, securing Earth's future and ensuring that humanity would never again be at the mercy of another empire. He knew that the political challenges were as great as the military ones, and he was prepared to meet them head-on. The rise of humanity as a galactic power was both thrilling and terrifying. As Earth's influence grew, so did the expectations placed upon them. The Silent Armada became the backbone of this new order, its ships a constant presence in the galaxy's most volatile regions. Humanity's newfound strength was undeniable, but with that strength came a responsibility to maintain peace and protect the innocent. Holt knew that the real test of Earth's power would come not in battle, but in diplomacy. The ability to manage alliances, navigate political intrigue, and maintain stability would determine whether humanity's rise was a fleeting moment or the beginning of a lasting legacy. As the weeks turned into months, Holt watched as the galaxy began to change. Former enemies were now allies, and new trade agreements flourished between previously hostile factions. Humanity's reputation as a peacekeeper was beginning to solidify. However, Holt was under no illusions. He knew that not everyone would welcome Earth's rise. There would be those who resisted, who saw humanity's strength as a challenge to their own power, and there would be those who sought to exploit Earth's alliances for their own gain. Holt's role was to ensure that Earth's influence remained a stabilizing force, not one that would topple the delicate balance of galactic politics. As Holt stood in the command center of the Silent Armada's flagship, watching the galaxy unfold before him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of both pride and apprehension. Humanity had come so far, but there was still much to be done. The challenges of maintaining peace, of forging new alliances and managing old grudges were only just beginning. But one thing was certain: humanity had earned its place in the galaxy. It was no longer an underdog. It was a force to be reckoned with. And as long as Holt had a say in it, he would make sure that Earth's role would be one of leadership, not domination. The road ahead was uncertain, but Holt was ready. The Silent Armada had been forged in the fires of war, but its true purpose was to ensure that humanity would never again be at the mercy of those who saw them as weak. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once. It wouldn't make that mistake again. The Crixel Collective, once a fearsome empire that had terrorized the galaxy with its relentless expansion, was now a shattered shadow of its former self. Its warlords had scattered to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, their once immense fleets decimated and their territories in chaos. What had been an unstoppable force just a year before was now nothing more than a collection of fragmented factions, fighting among themselves for scraps of power. The Crixel were no longer a threat, their collapse as swift as it was complete. As the dust of the Crixel's fall settled, Earth stood at the forefront of a new galactic order. Humanity had fought against impossible odds, wielding ingenuity and grit to bring down an empire that had seemed invincible. The Silent Armada, once a symbol of humanity's desperation, was now a permanent fixture in the galaxy's military landscape. It was a force that commanded respect, capable of enforcing peace where it was needed and ensuring that no power could rise. The galaxy now recognized Earth not as a fragile species barely scraping by, but as a dominant force, one that had earned its place through sheer will and determination. Yet even as Earth's influence expanded, Holt remained a quiet figure in the background. His leadership during the war with the Crixel had been pivotal, but he had never sought the spotlight. The victory was not his alone, but his tactical brilliance and steadfast resolve had been the catalyst that turned the tide. Holt's legacy was more than just the destruction of the Crixel. It was the embodiment of humanity's rise from the ashes of its past. His personal sacrifices, the pain of his past mistakes, and his unflinching drive to secure a future for humanity had become the foundation upon which Earth's new identity was built. He had become a symbol of resilience, not through physical might, but through the relentless pursuit of victory against overwhelming odds. But as Earth's stature grew, so did the weight of leadership. Holt knew the road ahead would not be without challenges. The galaxy was shifting in favor of humanity, but with that rise came new risks. Old enemies who had once believed that humanity was a fleeting nuisance now regarded Earth with wary respect. The Federation, while willing to accept Earth as an ally, still viewed them with suspicion. They had seen humanity's potential for destruction, but they had yet to fully understand the depth of Earth's commitment to peace. Some of Earth's new allies were former enemies, like the Zorothi defectors, who had turned their backs on their former masters but still carried grudges of their own. The galaxy, though vastly different from the one humanity had once known, was still full of complexities, old alliances, and ancient rivalries. The future of Earth in the stars would be defined not by the military strength of the Silent Armada alone, but by how humanity chose to wield that power. Holt's vision had always been clear. Earth would not dominate through fear, but through diplomacy, cooperation, and the willingness to protect the weak. Humanity's rise was not about revenge, but about ensuring that such a rise would never again be at the expense of innocent lives. Whose place in the galaxy was not one of conquest, but of guardianship, securing peace in a galaxy that had been ravaged by endless wars. As Earth began to rebuild and expand its influence, Holt found himself at a crossroads. The galaxy no longer saw humanity as an underdog struggling to survive in a harsh universe. Humanity had proven that it could rise to any challenge, adapt to any situation, and emerge victorious. But Holt knew that with victory came responsibility. The galaxy was now watching Earth, waiting to see if humanity could hold on to its newfound position. Holt's role, though less central now than it had been during the war, was still crucial. His experience, his leadership, and his unwavering belief in humanity's potential would guide Earth through the challenges that lay ahead. But Holt was not the only one who saw the road ahead as one of both opportunity and peril. The people of Earth, having tasted victory, were ready to move beyond the shadows of the past. They were no longer the isolated colony on the fringe of the galaxy. They were a central force with the power to shape the future of the galaxy. The Silent Armada, now strengthened by new technologies and an unshakable resolve, stood ready to protect Earth and its allies from any threat. But with that power came the responsibility to maintain the fragile peace they had fought so hard to create. Humanity's place in the stars was now unchallenged. The galaxy knew that Earth had the strength to defend itself, the wisdom to lead, and the compassion to protect. No longer would humanity be seen as a species to be overlooked or underestimated. The day of the Krexal's destruction had marked the end of an era in which humanity had been an afterthought in the galactic order. But it had also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one in which Earth would no longer be a pawn in the galactic chessboard, but a force that would shape the game. The final message from Holt, transmitted across the galaxy after the Krexal's defeat, had been simple but profound. We are no longer the underdog. We are the ones who decide what happens next. As Earth's fleets continued to patrol the stars, as new alliances were forged and old conflicts were resolved, one thing was clear: humanity had become a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy would never forget the day Earth turned the tables, and it would never underestimate humanity again. The war had been won, but the journey was just beginning. And with Holt's leadership, humanity would face whatever challenges the galaxy had yet to throw at them, ready to defend their place in the stars, not with vengeance, but with the promise of a future built on peace, strength, and unity. What do you think about humanity's rise in the galaxy? Could Earth really become the dominant force in the future, or are there new threats on the horizon? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.